Hey there guys, it's Metro, and welcome to the tank spec tier list for Mythic Plus dungeons made specifically for patch 7.3. In this video, we will be ranking tanks based on their ability to impact 5-man groups. It is purely made up of my opinions, formulated from thousands of Mythic Plus runs, as well as information from the recent Mythic Plus Dungeon Invitational and parsing sites like WoW Progress and Warcraft logs. For this tier list, I will primarily be focusing on three main factors. Number 1, their survival kit and how applicable it is to the dungeon. Number 2, their ability to output damage, especially without sacrificing survival. And number 3, the group-wide utility they bring and how it impacts the pace of the dungeon. Other things like mobility, affix flexibility, and global trends are considered as well and will be discussed. With all that aside, let's get right into it. Tier 1, number 1 overall is the Blood Death Knight. The Blood DK has been hovering near the top for quite a while thanks to their absurd self-healing potential, and after 2 to 3 major buffs stemming from 7.1 all the way to 7.2.5, they finally have their rightful spot restored as the best tank for any type of 5-man. Their survival kit is uniquely strong in 5-mans. Their defense gets stronger the more targets there are thanks to the Red Thirst talent and Umbilicus Eternus, and their lack of huge damage reduction usually never matters as 5-man bosses don't regularly challenge your health pool, and the constant stream of healing coming in leaves a net result of your health never moving. Their damage potential has grown increasingly strong over time thanks to some buffs and the availability of gear, but I'm not sure I would say that they are above average in terms of DPS tanks. It's taken a lot of effort for me to be able to get my Blood DK to where I am, and while the 7.2.5 buff was sorely needed, other tanks can still do more damage, especially outside of CDs. Their utility kit, however, is enough to turn a poorly optimized comp into a very well optimized one. I regard Death Grip as the single greatest utility in any dungeon as it regularly creates DPS increase potential, can interrupt extra abilities, and can also generally speed up the dungeon overall. The ability can even interrupt casts that can't be prevented any other way, like the Prophecy of Doom cast from the Dreadborn Seers in the Archway. And of course, they also have an AoE grip which can do all of this and more. But that's not all. They also have Battle Res, which in the past a lot of people were down on, but the more you do high keys, the more you will find that sometimes people just die. And the difference between advancing the key or failing to do so may also be the ability to bring those people back to life. They also have a ranged interrupt. As if this wasn't enough, they also have the single greatest addition to any tank artifact that came with 7.2 in Vampiric Aura. Basically every 45 seconds you give the group an insane amount of leech to the point that on AoE packs they will essentially be healing themselves to full, allowing the healer to do full DPS. Otherwise, their mobility is nothing to note, but Wraithwalk and Icebound Fortitude can provide some extra utility for breaking roots and stuns. They have decent flexibility, thanks to the legendary cloak immediately clearing necrotic, plenty of quick melee spells to dispatch orbs, and AMS to prevent bursting, etc. In short, Death Knight has no true weakness in 5-mans, and with all this considered, they are the total package at number 1. Their kit has extreme synergy with the idea that healers can put out real damage now too, so encourage the healer to DPS while you are self-healing yourself to full on every pack. Tier 1, number 2 is Guardian Druid. Bears have undeniably the strongest defensive kit for all content in the game, and 5-mans are no different. They reign supreme at reducing damage, and thanks to a very high health pool and a strong self-healing option, their loss of magical reduction does not hurt them too bad in Mythic Plus. Their damage potential is one that has transformed from near abysmal to potentially the strongest thanks to Thrash Relics, the 7.2 Thrash trait, and Incarnation talent. The real strength here is that the CD lasts for 30 seconds, meaning if used correctly, you will be topping the DPS on 2 consecutive pulls. Outside of CDs, they are below average, but using Incarnation properly will swing a dungeon heavily in your group's favor when used on the harder trash pack. In terms of utility, they are easily the second best. They have a similar pool of things they can do well alongside Death Knight, including a Battle Res, a knockback, an AoE interrupt, and of course, thanks to Guttural Roar's talent, they have the only tank-based group-wide movement speed increase in the whole game. Problem here is the dungeons are laid out in a way that it's not hugely useful like it used to be in challenge modes, especially in MoP. For mobility, they are surprisingly strong. Guttural Roars was mentioned, but of course affects them too, thanks to a trait that further increases their speed based on how many it hit. Their interrupt will charge them a short distance, which is strong, but less effective than simply having a full ranged interrupt. And they have dash, which is still the strongest speed buff in the game for any tank, but does require cat form, so it means it's harder to use, especially for kiting. I find Druid to have relatively weak flexibility in terms of affix, weaknesses. As their kiting is particularly weak, they have no immunities, but they do have a knockback for sanguine weaks. In short, the Bear Druid has a few minor flaws, but the nerfs have not stopped Bear from being the bulkiest tank outright, and with insane damage potential and very respectable utility, they should be considered for any group doing serious Mythic Plus. Tier 2, number 1 is Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance has had its ups and downs in terms of defense, but they have come out the better for it after 3 major patches. Vengeance remains to have an incredible active mitigation, but their true strength in 5-mans will be their self-healing. As almost all of their damage spells heal them in some way, what was said for DK is the same for Vengeance. The more mobs you fight, the stronger you become, and the less of the healer's attention you need. With damage in mind, it's hard to argue Vengeance isn't the most consistent damage dealer of all tanks. Unlike most tanks, they have a very strong single target burst window, and even after all the buffs and nerfs to Spirit Bomb, it remains a potent option alongside the rest of their kits. A geared and prepared Vengeance Demon Hunter will blur the line between tank and DPS, but it requires a lot more effort and skill than any other tank to perfect. For utility, Demon Hunter is in an odd position. They have a wide variety of spells, such as a weaker versions of Gorfiend's Grasp, an AoE Silence, and an AoE Fear. All 3 of these sigils can be very strong or very weak, depending on the situation, so it's hard to accurately discuss their utility objectively. What we can agree on is that they have a lot of ways to interrupt mobs, including a range interrupt that actually generates their main resource. What we do know to be their true strength is mobility and flexibility. Vengeance has the potential to travel an enormous gap in just 2 globals and have a built-in glider, which cannot be discounted, especially for any dungeon where terrain varies in height. They easily have the best mobility of any tank, but it's not always as useful as it might seem, as you run the risk of potentially outpacing your entire group quite easily. Their wide offensive mobility focused kit makes them a very capable tank for just about any affix, especially necrotic. In short, the most mobile tank is not always the most useful thing to be in Legion, but on top of a very active defense and offensive kit, Demon Hunter remains to be one of the strongest options for 5-mans outright, while also being one of the most difficult to master. Tier 2, number 2 is Brewmaster Monk. Defensively, they are true rivals to Bears, and only fall short due to their slight weakness to magic. Without a reliable self-heal, they may struggle to deal with some packs, but a veteran Brewmaster will explain the benefits of corner tanking, and how they can make up for some of their shortcomings that way. Regardless, a Brewmaster remain the single best tank at dealing with one huge physical swing thanks to Stagger, making them an easy pick for many bosses on High Tyrannical. Offensively, they are a mixed bag. They have no true offensive CD, but with the right gear, their rotational abilities like Keg Smash can hit harder than any other global in the game. With a focus on facepalm relics, you will quickly see their offensive skyrocket, and with offense comes defense. Exploding Keg leaves me wanting something more, but if used properly, will be the highest damaging opening global in the game for any tank. When looking at utility, you see one true standout, but that's it: Leg Sweep. Having an AoE stun on a tank is something that used to feel mandatory, but the challenge mode model is long past, and outside of it acting as an interrupt, tanks could have much better options in the way of utility. The changes to Ring of Peace, however, were a welcome addition, although they compete with Leg Sweep directly on the talent tree. Unless it's ever changed so they have both, they have an exceedingly poor utility kit. They are, however, the second most mobile tank thanks to Transcendence and Roll, and they also have the option to take Tiger's Lust, which can add a new dimension as well as potential group-based utility, but typically the tank is the only one who really needs this movement reliably. Because of this, they have similar flexibility to Demon Hunter, and even more so when you factor in Stagger. In short, they have clear strength, immense physical resistance, and top-tier mobility. Unfortunately, average DPS and poor utility make Brewmaster a pick I would tend to shy away from generally. Tier 3, number 1 is Protection Paladin. Unfortunately, Paladins have exhibited a fall from grace of monumental proportions. Their defensive kit still remains as wide as ever, but ultimately that is where the fault lies. Their active mitigation is easily the highest impact of any in the game, but it requires melee range, cannot be kept up with near 100% uptime, and also doubles as one of their top damaging spells, all in all making it very tough choice to use properly. They did receive a decent buff with 7.3, but what they really need is more HP, otherwise they will always be a glass cannon feel in 5-mans. Offensively, theirs is the saddest of stories. It seemed out of the gate that Paladin would have a clearly defined niche, moderate defense, but insane offense. Those who played through challenge modes and past expansions would know that oftentimes your tank's offense would be all that mattered, so the sky was bright and sunny for Paladins. As Legion has progressed, other tanks have gained some insane offensive capabilities, to the point that Paladin is barely ahead of any other tank, if not behind some now. They have lost their niche entirely, ability and gained nothing for it, as almost all of their offensive spells are still defense, so they either hold on to them and do no damage or use them in rotation and lack real defensive capability. This whole ordeal has dramatically affected their placement side by side with other tanks, but realize that alone they are still capable of doing very high damage regularly, thanks to wings and interactions with Avenger's Shield. In terms of utility, they are similar to Demon Hunter, wide but hard to apply. They have Bop and Sack, which can be very useful, especially in certain affixes, but their group-wide preservation is the most noticeable part. Thanks to Hand of the Protector talent, they now have a very reliable way to heal up other party members. On top of this, they also have the Judgment of Light talent, which will heal a steady amount, but nothing crazy in 5-mans. However, also on this tier is the strange Aegis of Light talent, which is generally useless, but can swing towards insane usability in affixes like Bursting. They can also use Lay on Hands to save a life, but that is harder to count on than simply using a battle res. For mobility, they are middle of the pack with no gap closers, but the Cavalier talent does help them out quite a lot. On that same talent tier, they also have the Necrotic Killer Blessing of Spell Warding. Because of how easily they handle Necrotic and Bursting, thanks to 2 immunities, they are very flexible depending on the affixes, but unfortunately, the rest of their kit does not allow that to shine through. In short, Paladin really just need one big buff to put them back to the top. They still have great damage and a very wide defensive kit, but it's just not applicable to 5-mans in any meaningful way compared to other tanks. Expect to see something come for them in 7.3.5, just like what happened with Vengeance and Blood in 7.2.5. As they stand, they are decent for low keys where damage is all that's important, but are a hard pass for anything that can easily kill the tank. And finally, Tier 3, number 3 is Protection Warrior. Unfortunately, there has been no change or update since the last time I made a tier list on this topic. They still do everything well, but nothing better than any other tank. It is because of this that, in my opinion, they are the worst tank currently for 5-mans of any kind. Their defensive abilities are still more than passable, and work very well in raids, but once again, struggle to apply to 5-mans when compared to other tanks. Their near complete lack of any healing options outside of legendary risks mean they cannot hang with just about any other tank side by side. Self-healing is the main reason why their kit is so poor, and it would take some sort of reliable self-heal to help them in this regard. Don't expect it though, as Blizzard seems fixated on them only ever being able to reduce damage. Offensively, they used to be out of control, and they still can be, thanks to the Devastator talent. The nerf to Revenge in 7.2.5 wasn't huge, but it rippled pretty largely in the pool of tank DPS, as other tanks started to do much more damage while they started to do less. In terms of utility, they are in the same boat as Brewmaster. They have a talented stun, which should be a no-brainer option, yet so many warriors run without it. And their only other real utility is a talent that competes with their only self-heal option. Inspiring Presence is very strong in raids, but unfortunately, since the warrior does not benefit from his own presence, it's just a poor man's version of Vampiric Aura, leaving them with easily the worst utility of all the tanks. Their mobility is a fine thing though, and with the legendary shoulders, they can come close to outpacing Vengeance and Brewmaster. But as discussed earlier, this level is wholly redundant, as you will also outpace your own group easily, and Warrior simply doesn't have the solo potential Demon Hunter has to make it worth trying. They have the potential to handle Necrotic well, but no other special abilities to make them stand out when it comes to afflicts flexibility either. As an aside, it should be noted that they were also given the poorest 7.2 artifact traits of all the tanks, to the point of it being borderline sad. It's hard to compare theirs to DK, Monk, or Bears, and not think Blizzard entirely dropped the ball for Prot Warriors. Anyway, in short, Warriors are the Mario of this world. They are well balanced and do most things decently, but you need your tank to specialize in something in order for it to be worth bringing. Their most glaring problem is a lack of any actual self-heal, and without this, putting them side by side to any other tank, even Paladins, is just miserable. I wouldn't expect a change in 7.3.5 either, but what I could see is another increase to their DPS or some big rework of their utility or survival. If that comes, they may move up a spot or two, but for now, I would consider their only true usage to be within raids. Well, that's the list. What'd you think? I want to take one more opportunity to say that these are, in fact, my opinions only, although they do seem to coincide with the recent Mythic Plus Invitational pretty heavily. The focus of these comment sections always seem to be on what I picked last, instead of anywhere else on the tier list. So please, if you're a big fan of Warrior or Paladins, please realize that they are still more than viable for 5-man. In Legion, everything is balanced very well, so you should never feel discouraged to play what you enjoy. But when you compare all 6 tanks side by side, there has to be a best and there has to be a worst. It wouldn't be a tier list if I simply said all 6 tanks are pretty good, now would it? Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, look out for the healer tier list coming soon.